Consider This, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bales Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello and welcome back to Consider This. My guests here are two wonderful people that are really into a topic that is a very serious one, but they know how to handle it with just the right finesse. We're talking about child sexual abuse. It's in the headlines a lot, but that doesn't even begin to address the numbers of cases of it and the people that are recovering at every age. My guests this week are Chris Bierman. She is the president of the Omaha chapter of Parents United, specifically Parents United of the Midlands. And Paige Lewis is the director of Parents United of the Midlands, and one of the umbrella organizations for you, or that you work out of, is Lutheran Family Services,
Yes.
a very good social service system in the Omaha metro area. We heard so much about it with the religion, the priest scandal, but you've been dealing with this issue for many years, both from a personal experience and a professional one. It's all over. I mean, unfortunately, that's the bad news. The good news is that there's some hope for people if they can kind of get linked up with.
Absolutely.
Get it out.
Absolutely. As bad as the child sexual abuse cases were with the priests involved, I think one thing that really came out of that publicity, a very positive thing, is that it got people talking about it. And that's probably the main barrier that we deal with, is people are afraid to talk about it.
I do want to, and we'll get into the fact that you've got a couple of events coming up where people can, just anonymously just come feel it out, but during this whole kind of exorcism for the Catholic Church in the United States, and it's a traumatic experience on every aspect of it. And there are other religions and other organizations that are sort of held in violet that
Absolutely.
this does happen, so we're not just pointing them out. But I know a number of people who were involved in that, who are grown up now, and how they've reacted to it and how they've dealt with it is the whole spectrum. Some of them still cannot even utter any of it. Some of them have not told their spouses, and others, have somewhere along the way gotten some help or come to resolution or had enough friends, whatever. But the torment of the people that can't talk about it, that it's a door that's closed, that they've boxed off, that's not good for any of us. We all, any kind of secret or things that we box off, is it?
Not at all. There's a saying we have, we're only as sick as our secrets. And the people that I see, the people who have the hardest time are those who could not tell anybody when they were kids. They did not feel safe enough to tell anybody, or if they did tell someone, they were blamed or shamed or ignored.
And we should mention that I know a lot of police officers and social workers who deal with the whole issue of having to make an arrest in a family or something like that, and all the guilt that goes on, that you've maybe taken the breadwinner away. Even family members that are sympathetic, the child involved often, even in divorces, kids think it's their fault when it wasn't. They tend to internalize everything, and they are the center of their universe at that age, and so everything relates to you. And you are a survivor of family abuse, and I just can't imagine what world kids are in, having to live through it and then deal with the dynamic consequences of family.
Right. I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand, that in 90% of the cases of child sexual abuse, the abuser is someone that the child knows.
A family member or a significant other of a family member or a trusted friend.
Teacher, daycare worker, someone in a religious organization. Think about how many people, how many adults your child comes in contact with, and you just don't know. I mean, any one of those could really be a possible offender. But when you are a child, your parents especially are your entire world, and there is so much emotional abuse and emotional manipulation that takes place before any of the physical sexual abuse really happens. And that's what...
It's a whole setup.
Absolutely.
I mean, they're set up to be manipulated to kind of be taken into this coven, this secret coven, or this covenant that they're developing with you. And so they feel when it all kind of explodes one way or the other, if it, you know, if there's an arrest or if somebody's caught, if that happens, then they feel, it felt right, not right isn't the right word, but it felt comfortable for a while to be taken into this scheme.
Absolutely.
And at some point it is not comfortable, but
Right.
the trust factor, the betrayal of trust. Trust is something that as you grow up is like any of those little things that are built in a child, that trust, bonding, all those things that make you, form you as a good person to yourself and a good citizen.
Right.
But that, not only the violation, the actual violation, but the betrayal of trust must be absolutely, that whole mechanism being kind of destroyed and shattered. That's
It
going to
is.
affect your whole life.
I think that's the most devastating piece of it, is not only the actual abuse, the physical part of the abuse, but that betrayal of trust. That's the biggest issue, I would say, and I don't know, Chris can probably vouch for this, that the people who come to Parents United is they don't trust anybody, and you can't blame them. So that's where I see it is the most courageous thing they can do, to come out with this, talk about it, you know, get into a support group, because they don't trust anybody. And how can they, you know, they really don't trust us.
And we're not talking about the trust regarding personal violation, but when those things are forming in a child, and you have little
Correct.
ones, those have to do with how you judge the world around you.
Absolutely.
A paranoia, a fight or flight thing that goes on kind of as a parallel system in you, that it's always there because you've had to develop that, where the trust factor is always questioned, even if it's kind of in the subconscious. And that's not a good thing.
No. Abusers know how vulnerable children are, and they build on that. They get the child to trust them, and then obviously they take advantage of that trust. For me personally, something that was really hit home to me was whatever happens in the family stays in the family.
Oh, that old, yeah.
You keep the secret. And it was very definitely ingrained into me that the way we are at home is not the way we're going to be in public. You know, in public we're going to have this we're a happy family, we're a wonderful family, all-American family. When at home, it was far from that. It was very dysfunctional. There was a great deal of abuse going on. But what a child learns is they learn to lie. They learn to keep secrets. They learn that I pretend.
A covering, constant
Absolutely.
covering. That takes up an
Absolutely.
incredible amount of energy in a developing child. That so much goes into this protection mechanism, this covering, that's a lot of energy that should be used for other things.
Being a
I know
kid.
that sounds like
Being a
overly
kid.
weird,
Yeah.
but
Being
I
a
mean
kid.
you're constantly on guard.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So
And, I mean, I don't feel as though I had a childhood. I feel as though my childhood was really taken from
you were a
me.
little adult
Exactly.
because you were doing
Absolutely.
adult things, which is sort of trying to constantly balance and what you say and what you do, and that's the time of life where you kind of, you know, you let it happen and your personality comes up, and you can't even let your natural personality come out.
No, you do not. You're not allowed to have your own feelings. You're not allowed to develop your own personality or your own person. I didn't really get to know who I was as a person until probably 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, when I finally started dealing with things.
Okay. Everybody, I'm sure, comes to terms with this in their own way, or doesn't. But you have a couple of things coming up. On February 6th at Papillion La Vista High School, you have a kind of a community opportunity to listen to some people. You'll be speaking,
Right.
Paige, and
Right.
you have at least one other person.
I will be.
Chris will be
also.
And you'll be
speaking.
speaking.
And a counselor.
And a counselor. And people could come, and there's no, I'm sure you don't grill them who they are or anything. They can
No.
just kind of, and then you've got something coming up in March, which is National Child Sexual Abuse Awareness Month.
April
Is April.
April.
To kick off.
And so, but at the end of March, you have an event at Kuntz Memorial. So there are some opportunities, and that's why we're bringing this up now, in case you've ever thought of it. But how did you get in touch with first yourself? Because you have to get in
Right.
touch with yourself to be able to make a little jump there, a little leap of faith.
Absolutely.
But where did the realization that A, you had to do something, and then B, who did you make that leap of faith to, or what organization?
For me, personally, I always knew that there was something wrong, and I always thought there was something wrong with me. I mean,
course.
pretty much my entire life, I felt that
Not worthy.
absolutely very low self-esteem. I just knew I wasn't normal.
Did you know what had happened was all wrong, or did you kind of, it just became a part of your life that you just kind of boxed away, and you didn't think about it as this horrible thing that happened? I mean,
Right.
exactly what was kind of going on in your mind? You just,
In my mind, it was
or did you disassociated this awful thing with
Absolutely.
who you were? And that's
Absolutely.
part of the problem.
for me, I always admitted there was quite a bit of physical abuse, there was quite a bit of emotional and verbal abuse. I always admitted that to myself. I always admitted it to others. In fact, I always kind of made a joke out of it.
Yeah.
I didn't realize how much it had affected me. The sexual abuse, I really did not admit or even deal with until about 3 years ago. And I knew that there was something wrong, but again, I thought it was just the way I was. You know, I was going to have to live with this.
Do you put it in a fog off somewhere in your mind? You park it over
Oh,
there?
absolutely.
And
Yeah.
compartmentalize, I guess, is one of the,
You
I don't know
just
what the
don't wanna
the
go
hip
there.
phrase is. But you just stay away from it. It's like Danger Will Robinson.
And for me, I knew that there were things that weren't right. Especially as a young child, I would lock myself in the closet and I would act out sexually. And we're talking when I was 3, 4, 5 years old. That is not normal behavior for, I mean, yes, there's some sexual play
Sure,
that is
that's
normal for children,
Oh,
but
sure.
to actually act out in a sexual role is not normal. That was something that I knew I did. I didn't know why I did it.
Okay, so at some point, 2 to 3 years ago, you say,
There was
something has to happen here. I mean, how do you visualize what's got to happen and make a move?
For me, it was after the birth of my daughter. I went through some very bad postpartum depression, kind of hit bottom, so to speak. I knew.
So your hormones kind of helped you
Oh, yeah.
to that realization. But I mean, everything kind of crashed at once.
I knew if I wanted to be a good mother to my daughter, I had to basically get my life together. I knew there were things that weren't right. I didn't know why. I didn't know how.
You hadn't
to
connected
get-
all of it exactly.
Had not connected it. I called one of my very good friends who works in a counselor's office and kind of told her I was having trouble. At that time, I didn't really know what was going on. I told her I had trouble adjusting to being a new mom. And bless her heart, she called me right back and said, okay, you have an appointment with Peg at 2 o'clock on Thursday. So my friend actually set up a counseling
Kind
appointment
of like
for
a little
me,
intervention. You clued her in, and she kind of just took the.
which doesn't always work.
No.
But for me personally, I felt very safe. I trusted that friend. I trusted her judgment, and I felt safe with her action.
Paige, these epiphanies that something needs to be done probably don't always. They may come or not come, or they may not be heeded. What are some of the different scenarios that maybe if anybody's watching or knows anyone, they can at least say, maybe that's what's happening.
Right. In fact, a lot of people that come to counseling, just general counseling, if we find out later that they've been abused as a child sexually, they do not come in for that issue. They come in because
I got to get my act together. Things aren't working right. I'm not getting along.
divorced for the 3rd time. Every one of my spouses have been violent. I'm fighting a drug addiction. I'm sober now, but I still feel bad. I have an eating disorder.
So it's the symptomatic kinds of things.
Can't keep a job. A lot of things.
And so
Yeah.
dealing with this manifests, picking the wrong people as partner. I mean,
Definitely.
This is not just something you hear on Law and Order by a defense attorney.
No, this is everyday
real stuff.
Everyday stuff.
And
unfortunately.
people don't understand. I didn't. I certainly didn't understand the connection between the symptoms and the cause. A lot of times people will work on the symptoms without really understanding why. I mean, I had an eating disorder. I was bulimic. I was anorexic. I went through a little phase where I drank a lot as an escape. I was also date raped my first week in college at UNL. And I've come to understand that a lot of times when a child is sexually abused, later on in their life, they will actually run into sexual abuse as an adult because they get so desensitized to what sex is. They get
Or there are cases where I know this just from working with young girls, and this isn't always a case, where then they will begin to act out.
Absolutely.
And come, because their only value comes from being.
Exactly.
But they don't make all that connections of why.
No.
Exactly.
What happens is because
There's
that's
different
what
extremes.
That's what the offender does. The offender confuses sex with intimacy, and that is kind of transferred onto the child. And so that's what they grow up thinking, is that if I'm going to feel valuable and if I'm going to feel a connection to someone, I have to have sex with them.
Touching or just kind of.
It
I've
has
seen
to
it in
be
teenage
sexual.
girls because that's who I've worked with.
Exactly.
But the opposite can happen. You can be totally in.
Exactly.
So there's no set prescription so that people can say, I wonder if my friend
Right.
Right.
had. But intimacy is almost always, real intimacy is usually always an issue. And I mean that
absolutely.
psychological
It is, yeah.
intimacy. You shut off
Absolutely.
little mechanisms that say, I can do things, physically do things, but that's all that can be.
Right.
When you talk to survivors, it's very common that even if they do become promiscuous, they may be there physically, but mentally,
They're
emotionally, they are
shut
completely
down.
shut off. Exactly, they dissociate their mind from their body.
Just like they
And
did
that's
when they
one-
were being abused.
That's one of the
Absolutely.
saddest results. I mean, yes, you can get in a violent relationship, or you can be a violent person to somebody, or all kinds of things, or just the opposite, where you're just stepped on, or what. And there's all kinds of manifestations, but I think probably the saddest thing is to have to shut down, natural feelings, whether it just be happiness, allowing
Exactly.
yourself just to laugh.
Yes, I thought that I would never be happy. I thought that I was just a person who, for whatever reason, that was my lot in life. I was just never going to be a happy person.
You might get close to it, but it just nothing
Right.
ever. It just escaped you all the time.
Right. And another very common side effect is anger. I was
Rage.
I was an extremely angry person. I was kind of the road rage queen to the point of being chased by other drivers because I had so much anger inside of me. I had no idea where it came from, but I projected it onto other people instead of facing the fact that that anger belonged with my abuser.
Did you have any particular anger towards men, unconsciously?
It wasn't really anger as much as uncomfortable. I did not trust them. I was one of the people who, I didn't talk to boys in high school. I never dated. I was very introverted, very isolated, very shy. In college, well, as I said, I was date raped my first week in college.
Well, what extreme to go from nothing to that? I mean,
Right. So after that experience, I definitely shut down from men. I didn't even let them approach me.
Okay, help me out here. You're chicks. I'm a chick, female. We don't have any men here because their working schedules didn't necessarily
Right.
permit them.
Right.
How does it manifest itself differently
In men?
in men? Although I'm sure there's some similar things, but
Many similar things, but unfortunately, because of our society and how we raise boys and girls, I think it's just a lot harder for boys and men to admit that this has happened to them.
the people I know have the worst time are men.
Yes, in
Uh,
fact, we open our program to boys and men who have been abused. I haven't been able to get 2 or 3 boys together for our boys group for about a year now. We've only got maybe 2 or 3 adult men who come to our Parents United support group, and a lot of things I hear is, even though this abuse happened when they were little kids, is somehow I wanted it. It was a good thing.
Well, then there's this whole
homophobic
stuff
society that we
comes in
have.
on the more on the male
Exactly.
side. Women are a little more.
Right.
They may not agree that homosexuality, gay and lesbian activity is good, but they can look a woman in the eye and not be.
Right.
I mean, it's just.
If we've got a boy who's, say, 14, and we've got a 35-year-old neighbor who is sexually abusing him, a lot of the response from the public is, "Oh, good for you.
Right.
You're learning early, and how lucky you are." Well, if that's a 35-year-old guy and a 14-year-old girl, we're like, that's abuse, and it's abuse both ways. So, but
It's
then
kind of an extra layer of guilt.
uh-huh.
Like an additional layer.
Oh,
as if the
definitely.
ones they
Why
have
didn't I
aren't enough.
enjoy it? I'm a guy. I'm supposed to enjoy this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then if it's abuse from a guy, from an
Right.
adult male,
Maybe
then
I
it's like,
did, and
maybe,
then I'm.
yeah, and then maybe I'm gay, which has nothing to do with
And that
it.
might just always be. Then they're fighting the normal. probably a normal teenage boy thing, is that, you know, were you not attracted to another boy, but I mean, even the thought of being touched in a certain way accidentally would send you
Sure.
to. So then you've got, I mean, that takes it exponentially to
Exactly.
to
Right.
another level, and so you
Exactly.
just don't even want to utter to anyone
Of course
that this
not.
might have ever happened.
In fact, a lot of men who were sexually abused as boys and who have stuffed it and who do not want to admit it, and they are very violent, and a lot of adult men who gay bash, they have been sexually abused as children, and that's how it comes out, like overcompensating. They're very masculine,
I'm so
very
far from
macho,
that.
and yeah, wouldn't even think of hugging another man or anything. So
So where do we go from here? I mean, obviously, this is something that everybody has to reach on their own. You know, that something's not right, and I have to. But how do you know, maybe somebody will see this, but I mean, overall, you guys have probably just been plugging along in your organization. Probably have plenty of people to handle. In other words, as you know, to work with people as a professional and as a support person. But you know, there's so much more out there that
There
isn't.
is.
Absolutely.
What would you say
whoa.
to a 40-year-old man? I'm going to throw this out, and I don't want to bring the priest thing up again, but just say a 40-year-old man who is at a Catholic grade school, was sexually abused, and is sitting out there and still can't deal.
I would say
about it.
you're not alone. We do have men in our Parents United support group, and I figure even if we've got 2 or 3 of them, that's somebody, so that when the next adult male comes, they won't be alone.
What if they just want to talk? So if they called up and said, I'd like, if you know, this is kind of, you don't know who I am, but this is kind of what happened to me, whether it was my family member, whatever. Do you, is there, you know, could you have somebody call me that's kind of been through
Definitely.
this? Meet me for coffee, you know, a non-threatening
Definitely.
mail.
Oh, absolutely.
kind
I
of
would
a-
love
mean,
that.
Would
Definitely. Not a
you
problem.
can accommodate the limitations they may have in putting their toe in the water?
Exactly. We would never just push them into something that they weren't
You
ready
got
for.
to come to a meeting, and you got to get up and say, my name is so-and-so, and I,
Oh, Lord,
you know, kind of
no.
the Alcoholics Anonymous kind of.
No, in fact, the people who come to our support groups really need to be in individual therapy first, because the group can be very overwhelming if they haven't done any work at all.
Okay, so how do you find a therapist? You know, I know
Good
many
question.
people, and in my life, I have sought out for myself or family members somebody just to talk to.
Sure.
That is one of the hardest things
Yes.
in the world. Here you've got some sort of problem. Maybe you even need to find a psychiatrist because you know I have depression in my family and you want to
Sure.
be checked for that.
Sure.
Finding someone, A, that you can get an appointment with, B, that your insurance might cover, and C, that you might have a connection with.
And that you can trust, and that is knowledgeable about child
I mean,
sexual
we're
abuse
talking
issues.
about one of the hardest
That's
things in the world.
huge.
It's easier to find, you know, a gynecologist on Mars for a woman
Right.
sometimes than it is.
Well, I've got a running list that I've compiled over the past 4 years that I've been with Lutheran Family Services, and it's therapists that I either know from working with them or that have had clients who've come to Parents United, and the people in Parents United trust the therapist, so it's like, okay, I'll put them on my list. I won't just tell somebody to go through the phone book and find somebody. I'll say, these are the people I know work with child sexual abuse issues, they understand it, they're educated, they're experienced, but you're still going to have to find one exactly that's on your insurance and that you
Right.
click with and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I
It's-
mean, it seems like the obstacles, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's an obstacle enough to come to the point where you say, I'm even going to pick up a phone and look for a
Exactly.
therapist, let alone to run into these kinds of things that we all run into in looking for doctors and therapists, and you know,
Right.
just in the life as we know it today in the medical insurance world.
Exactly. You're scared to death. Just my own personal
Even to
experience.
say words like,
I was
want to make an
sexually
appointment
abused.
to, you know, well, I mean, just
I
even
know.
just going in for some personal
Absolutely.
counseling when you don't know what even is the matter is
For me
huge.
personally, I was literally scared to death to pick up that phone. And the first counselor I called, this was before I had told my friend that I needed help. The first counselor I called, the person was very rude because they didn't take my insurance. I hung up the phone and I started crying. And I'm like, here I am, I'm trying to get help, and these people are telling me no. When I made the phone call to Paige, I was also scared to death. But Paige, bless her heart, made me feel very comfortable, made me feel safe immediately, and I felt a connection there. I felt like finally somebody understands. And what I would say to the survivor who is out there, who's 35, 40 years old and has never really dealt with this, I totally understand because they're afraid, they're scared to death. And that fear I've actually had survivors tell me that they've stuffed it down for so long that they were afraid when they finally opened the door and said the words out loud, it would literally kill them. Because
Paralyzing.
Because they were
Exactly.
so afraid of it. And my message to those people would be, you don't need to live with that fear. You lived with that fear every day as a child, every day of your life. You don't need to live with it any longer.
One other thing, we just have a few minutes. Society has come to go different, the pendulum swings differently on victims. You know, we'll go through a very empathetic, you know, we work with victims, and or I hate people that are victims. And many people are self-loathing in that I am a victim and I cannot conceive that I was a victim. And I don't like victims, and I don't like people that talk about being a victim. And so that's another reason to stuff it away.
Right.
Be tough, be strong.
Exactly. Yeah, get
Do
over
you
it.
always have to look at yourself as a victim? Is there a different
Oh
approach
Lord, no.
that counselors and whatnot will
my
take?
goodness, we encourage people to not. In fact, in Parents United, we go around and introduce ourselves, first names only, why we're there. And I know Chris and the other survivors say, I'm a survivor.
Absolutely.
I was sexually abused as a child, and I'm a survivor.
So you start from a position of power rather than weakness. In other words,
Of
I have an
course.
accomplishment. Okay, I've got this, but I've got some issues dealing this
Sure.
that have to be resolved so that I can become even more stronger in my
Empowered,
survival.
yes.
Right.
Empowered.
Otherwise, you're giving your offender power over you, even if they're totally out of
Or
your
they're
life.
dead.
Or they're dead. Exactly. You're still giving them power.
You can control, can take back that control that was taken from you as a child. You don't have to allow them to control you any longer. You can take control of your life, you can be happy, you can not only survive, but you can thrive.
But if you've lost that power early on, then you've really lost the power to cope in general.
Yes.
I mean, you may not see it that way, but those contribute to losing power and other things in your life.
And you'll see a lot of survivors that are real control freaks because they feel out of control. So they might be overachievers too.
So in other words, this can manifest itself in about every way.
Yep.
So if you're kind of looking at your life and you've boxed this away, you might want to think about. Parents United is on the internet. If you go to unotv.unomaha.edu, you can find the website. And I hope you'll let everybody know on that website about what's these things coming up. So we've got one March 29th and one coming up February 6th at Papillion La Vista High School. Thank you very much,
Thank
Chris
you.
Bierman
Carol.
and Paige Lewis. Think about it, folks. It's just too important not to think about. Thanks again. Thanks for joining us this week on Consider This.